What we witnessed on Sunday against Pittsburgh was one of those games that perfectly captures where the Detroit Lions are right now. Competitive, resilient, emotionally exhausting, and painfully close, yet still coming up short when it matters most. A 29-24 loss to the Steelers dropped the Lions to 8-7, and with just 2 games left, the playoff margin is razor thin. And before anyone tries to pin this on bad luck alone, Dan Campbell made something very clear afterward. This isn't about excuses. Injuries have hit this team hard for a second straight season, especially along the offensive line and in the secondary. But Campbell openly took responsibility, saying he hasn't gotten enough out of this group to turn these close games into wins. And yet, this game had moments where it felt like Detroit had done enough to win. Late in the fourth quarter, Jared Goff found Amon-Ra St. Brown on what looked like a 1-yard touchdown that would have flipped the game on its head. Ford Field was ready to explode. Instead, a flag came out. Offensive pass interference on Isaac Taslaw wiped the play off the board. The explanation from referee Carl Cheffers was that Taslaw picked a defender beyond 1 yard, creating separation for St. Brown, which made it a foul by rule. Watching it back, you can see why this call is going to be debated all season long. There's contact, there's traffic, and it's happening in the most critical moment of the game. That's the fine line the Lions are walking right now. Inches and judgment calls deciding entire seasons. Just a few plays later, there was another moment that could have gone down in franchise lore. St. Brown lateraled the ball back to Goff on the final play, and Goff found the end zone. It would have been an unforgettable finish, but it didn't count. Adding to the frustration, there was also an offensive pass interference call on St. Brown earlier that, while unpopular, did appear to be correct, as he initiated contact and extended his arms to create separation. These are the types of plays that define whether a team survives December or watches January football from home. Despite the loss, there were individual performances that cannot be ignored. Aiden Hutchinson continues to cement himself as one of the cornerstones of this franchise. His first quarter sack of Aaron Rodgers gave him double-digit sacks on the season, and by the end of the game, Hutchinson had 2 sacks, marking the 8th multi-sack game of his career. More importantly, he became the first player in Lions history to post multiple 10-sack seasons within his first 4 years in the league, after recording 11.5 sacks in 2023. Only 5 players in franchise history have ever managed multiple double-digit sack seasons at all. Even in losses, Hutchinson is showing up like a star who understands the weight of this moment. Jared Goff also did his part through the air. He completed 34 of 54 passes for 364 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and finished with a 101.2 passer rating. That performance extended his streak to 21 straight games with a touchdown pass, tying the longest streak in Lions history. He also crossed the 30-touchdown mark on the season, becoming the first quarterback in franchise history to throw 30 or more touchdown passes in 3 different seasons. Whatever questions may exist about this team, Goff's production and consistency in the passing game are not among them. Where the alarm bells are truly ringing is up front. For the second straight week, Detroit lost badly at the line of scrimmage. Against the Rams, the Lions were outrushed 159-70. Against Pittsburgh, it was even worse, 230 yards to just 15. This team's entire turnaround over the past few seasons has been built on dominating the trenches and imposing a physical run game. Right now, that identity is slipping, and that's something that will demand serious attention in the offseason if the Lions want to remain contenders rather than hopefuls. There were also troubling moments on defense unrelated to talent or injuries. Substitution issues continue to pop up at the worst times. The Lions were flagged for too many men on the field and later had to burn a crucial timeout because only 10 defenders were lined up on a critical 4th down. These are self-inflicted wounds, and in a season where every possession matters, they are magnified. Still, not everything is trending the wrong way. Jameson Williams quietly reached another milestone, hauling in 5 catches for 70 yards to push him to 1,006 receiving yards on the season. That gives him back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, building on the 1,001 yards he recorded last year. For a 4th-year receiver, that level of production and growth is a positive sign for the future of this offense. So here we are, an 8-7 team with slim playoff hopes, a quarterback playing some of the best football in franchise history, a defensive star breaking records, and a run game that has completely stalled at the worst possible time. Everything feels fragile, but not finished. From your perspective as a Lions fan watching this unfold, do you feel like this loss says more about bad breaks and execution in key moments? Or does it expose deeper issues that could define how this season ultimately ends? The reason that question matters is because the answer shapes how we interpret everything that comes next for this team. When you strip the emotions away, what's happening with the Lions isn't random. It's a pattern that has been forming over the last 2 weeks, and Sunday against Pittsburgh simply amplified it. The Lions are being asked to win games in ways that don't align with how this roster was originally built. When the run game disappears almost entirely, when the line of scrimmage tilts this heavily in the opponent's favor, the margin for error becomes microscopic. That's how you end up with games decided by flags, substitutions, and 1 or 2 broken moments instead of sustained control. Think about what Detroit was forced to do offensively. Jared Goff dropped back 54 times. That alone tells the story. This wasn't a balanced attack where the passing game complemented the run. This was Goff carrying the offense because there was simply nothing available on the ground. 15 rushing yards in an entire game is not just a bad stat line, it's a flashing warning sign. It allowed Pittsburgh to dictate tempo, control field position, and keep Detroit constantly playing from a place of urgency instead of authority. Even with Goff playing efficiently and mistake-free, the offense had to be almost perfect to overcome that imbalance, and perfection is rarely sustainable in the NFL. Defensively, the Lions showed flashes of who they want to be, especially with Aiden Hutchinson continuing to disrupt games at an elite level. But even strong individual performances can only cover so much when the unit struggles with details. The substitution issues aren't about talent, and they're not about injuries. They're about communication, awareness, and execution under pressure. Burning a timeout because you only have 10 players on the field in a critical situation is the kind of mistake that changes outcomes. It doesn't show up as a turnover on the stat sheet, but it carries the same weight. And this is where Dan Campbell's comments after the game really land differently. When a head coach openly says it's on him, that he hasn't gotten enough out of the team, it's not coach speak. It's an acknowledgement that the Lions are close, but not clean enough. Close doesn't get you into the playoffs. Clean execution does. The Lions are good enough to hang with teams like Pittsburgh, good enough to put themselves in position to win late. But right now they're not sharp enough to consistently finish. What makes this stretch especially frustrating for fans is that there is real progress happening at the same time. Jared Goff is rewriting franchise records. Aiden Hutchinson is building a historical start to his career. Jameson Williams is quietly becoming a reliable, productive weapon with consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. These are foundational pieces doing their jobs at a high level. That's not something to dismiss. That's something to build around. But football doesn't reward potential or individual milestones when the collective details fall apart. With 2 games left, the Lions are still alive, but the reality is unforgiving. There's no room left for procedural errors, no space for slow starts in the trenches, and no buffer for missed opportunities in the red zone. Every snap now carries postseason weight. The question isn't whether this team cares or fights, because that's obvious every Sunday. The question is whether they can align their identity, execution, and discipline at the same time when the pressure is at its highest. This is the crossroads moment. Either these losses become the fuel that sharpens everything heading into the final stretch, or they become the proof that this group is still one step away from turning promise into consistency. That's what the next 2 games are going to tell us. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe this team can clean up the details and make a real push over these final weeks? Or do you think the cracks we're seeing now are too deep to overcome this season? Drop your opinion in the comments, and if you want more Lions breakdowns like this, make sure you're subscribed. Leave a like, and stay with the video because there's more coming next. And that's where the emotional divide among Lions fans really sits right now, because you can make an honest case on both sides without being wrong. On one hand, this team is not collapsing. They are not getting blown out. They are not being embarrassed, and they are not quitting on games. They are competing snap for snap with playoff caliber teams while dealing with real limitations, especially up front. On the other hand, the NFL does not hand out postseason spots for effort, context, or moral victories. It hands them out to teams that impose their identity regardless of circumstances, and right now Detroit's identity is being challenged in the most uncomfortable way possible. What makes this moment so defining is that the Lions no longer have the luxury of waiting for things to balance out. There's no long runway left. The issues we're seeing, the run defense getting gashed, the offense becoming one-dimensional, the mental mistakes on defense, all have to be corrected immediately, not gradually. And that's difficult because these aren't problems solved by one play or one player. They require cohesion. They require discipline. They require the kind of collective sharpness that separates playoff teams from those watching at home. You can feel the tension between what this team wants to be and what it currently is. Detroit wants to be physical, controlling, and relentless. But when opponents are winning the trenches and dictating pace, the Lions are forced into reaction mode. That's not where this roster is at its best. The passing game has been strong enough to keep them alive, but relying solely on that puts enormous pressure on execution. Every third down becomes critical. Every penalty becomes magnified. Every officiating decision feels like it carries extra weight because there's no cushion underneath it. And yet, despite all of this, the season is still breathing. That's the part that refuses to go away. 2 games remain, and the Lions still control how they respond. This stretch will tell us more about the foundation of this team than any highlight or stat ever could. It will tell us whether the progress of the last few years has built real resilience, or if it's still dependent on ideal conditions to succeed. Adversity is no longer theoretical. It's here, it's heavy, and it's unavoidable. This is where leadership matters most. From the sideline, from the huddle, and from the locker room. It's about aligning focus, eliminating self-inflicted damage, and rediscovering the physical edge that defined this team's rise in the first place. If the Lions can do that, even imperfectly, they still have a chance to change the narrative of this season. If they can't, then this stretch will be remembered as the moment when opportunity slipped just out of reach. Now it's on you, the fans who live every snap of this season. Do you still believe this team has another level it can reach when it matters most? Or do you feel like what we're seeing right now is the true ceiling for this group in 2025? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more Lions coverage. Leave a like if you're riding with this team until the end, and keep watching because there's more coming up next on the screen. What happens next will ultimately define how this season is remembered, not just in the standings, but in the mindset of this fan base. Because this is no longer about projections or percentages or hoping other teams lose. This is about whether the Lions can look at their own flaws in real time and respond with clarity instead of hesitation. The margin is gone. What's left is accountability on every snap. That's the hard part, and it's also the revealing part. You can sense that this team understands the weight of the moment. There's frustration, yes, but there's also urgency. And urgency can be dangerous in 2 very different ways. It can sharpen focus, tighten execution, and bring out the best version of a team. Or it can press players into forcing things, overthinking assignments, and compounding mistakes. The next stretch will tell us which direction this locker room leans when the pressure becomes unavoidable. The most important adjustment isn't schematic, it's foundational. The Lions have to reestablish physical credibility, even if it doesn't immediately show up in explosive numbers. That starts with winning early downs, staying on schedule, and not allowing games to spiral into situations where everything depends on late-down perfection. When Detroit controls tempo, they dictate emotion. When they don't, everything feels rushed, tense, and reactive. That's the difference between playing to your identity and surviving without it. There's also a mental reset that has to happen defensively. The talent is there to compete, but the details have to tighten. Communication errors, substitution lapses, and procedural penalties cannot exist at this stage of the season. These aren't mistakes born from effort, they're mistakes born from disconnect. Fixing that doesn't require new personnel, it requires alignment. Everyone seeing the same picture, reacting at the same speed, and trusting that the man next to them is exactly where he's supposed to be. What makes this moment compelling is that the Lions are not being asked to become something new. They're being asked to return to what made them dangerous in the first place. Toughness, precision, collective belief. That version of this team has shown up before. The question is whether it can show up again when the pressure is highest and the room for error is non-existent. These final games aren't just about a playoff push. They're about proving that this rebuild has reached a stage where adversity no longer defines outcomes. Win or lose, how the Lions respond right now will echo into the offseason, into roster decisions, and into how this team is viewed across the league. This is the evaluation window, not in theory, but in real time. There's also something else that can't be ignored in moments like this, and that's the psychological weight of repeated close losses. When games consistently come down to a handful of snaps, a single flag, or one missed assignment, it starts to test belief in subtle ways. Not belief in effort or preparation, but belief that things will finally break your way when it matters most. Teams that make the jump from competitive to consistent usually do it by pushing through this exact phase. Teams that don't often look back at stretches like this as the warning they couldn't overcome. For Detroit, the challenge is resisting the urge to chase perfection. That's when players start pressing, trying to do too much, or stepping outside their role. This team is at its best when it trusts structure and plays fast within it. The offense doesn't need miracle plays. The defense doesn't need hero moments on every down. What they need is collective reliability. Do your job, trust the call, and let the game come to you. That sounds simple, but under late-season pressure, it's one of the hardest things to maintain. You can already sense that the conversation around this team is shifting from "are they good enough?" to "are they ready?" Those are two very different questions. The talent on this roster has answered the first one repeatedly. The second one is still open. Readiness shows up in the small moments, lining up correctly, managing substitutions cleanly, sustaining drives when the run game isn't explosive, and closing out possessions without panic. Those are playoff habits, and they have to become instinctive. What keeps this story compelling is that the Lions are still in control of their response. There's no outside force dictating their fate yet. No scenario where everything depends on chaos elsewhere. It's still about internal correction and internal belief. That's both empowering and intimidating. Empowering because the path is clear. Intimidating because there's nowhere to hide if things don't change. This stretch is where reputations are quietly formed. Not just for stars, but for the collective identity of the team. How they respond now will shape how opponents prepare for them, how analysts talk about them, and how fans remember this season years from now. These games are pressure tests, and pressure tests don't lie. At some point, seasons stop being measured by what a team could become and start being judged by what it actually does under pressure. That moment has arrived for Detroit. There's no developmental lens left to view this through. The Lions are not an up-and-coming story anymore. They're a team with expectations, a standard, and a fan base that knows what competitive football looks like. That's why these last games feel heavier than the record alone suggests. They're a referendum on growth. What makes this situation so delicate is that the gap between success and disappointment is incredibly thin. The Lions aren't missing by miles. They're missing by moments. A missed block here, a miscommunication there, a procedural mistake at the worst possible time. Those aren't flaws you fix by blowing things up. Those are flaws you fix by sharpening focus and discipline. But sharpening under pressure is exactly what separates teams that endure from teams that evolve. There's also an honesty that has to exist internally right now. This team has to confront what's working and what isn't without defensiveness. The passing game is carrying weight. That's a fact. The trenches, especially in the run game, are not setting the tone the way this team needs them to. That's also a fact. Acknowledging that doesn't mean abandoning identity. It means protecting it by fixing